A secret in his wallet. Chapter 1: A new beginning. I was still trying to catch my breath from running across campus when the text notification chimed on my phone. At 24, I often felt like I was straddling two worlds: the hectic schedule of my advanced program, where I spent hours buried in textbooks, and the real world, where I was a single mother trying to keep a small human being fed, clothed and happy. I fished the phone out of my bag and saw his name flash on the screen. Michael. Just seeing that name gave me a small surge of comfort, followed by the gentle pang of anxiety I always felt around him. At 42, Michael was nearly twice my age, but from the day we met, he'd had this self-assured way about him that made me feel simultaneously guarded and protected. I couldn't quite explain it. In many ways, I knew how it must look from the outsider, a young woman balancing college and motherhood, meeting a middle-aged guy with a stable job. It was the sort of cliché you'd see on TV or overhear in a coffee shop. But it didn't feel cliché to me then. It felt as if I'd discovered a man who promised stability. I was a single mother by the time I turned 22, grappling with postpartum depression and the rigors of a demanding academic path. My daughter Melanie was my world, but raising a child while pursuing a professional program full-time left little room for dating, let alone nights out or any semblance of a social life. That changed the day Michael strolled into the campus cafe, well dressed in a crisp button-down and grey slacks, eyes scanning the pastry display. I was behind the counter as a student employee, picking up extra shifts whenever my schedule allowed. He was an unanticipated visitor in my everyday life. I remember how he smiled at me. "Could I get a black coffee?" he'd asked, voice deep. The unexpected warmth of his gaze made my cheeks burn. Even though he was definitely older, there was something compelling about the confidence in his posture. I'd only said a few words. "Sure, no problem." And he lingered at the counter afterward, sipping that coffee, as if he had nowhere else to be. He was the first to speak again. "Are you a student here?" I looked at him, startled by his directness. "Yes, I'm in a demanding program," I replied vaguely, not wanting to overshare, but a trickle of curiosity made me keep talking. "It's complicated. I have a daughter, so I juggle a lot." Instead of the pitying expression or the polite brush off I'd come to expect, Michael's face lit up with genuine interest. "That sounds like a lot on your plate," he'd said softly, meeting my eyes. "Impressive. My daughter is grown now. She's a teenager. But I remember those early years, tough times." That's how I learned he already had a child, much older than mine. He never explicitly said he was single. He just said he had a daughter. "A handful," he joked. The memory of him that day remains vividly etched in my mind. He had this air of quiet authority, something that spoke of experience. It wasn't just his age, but the assured way he carried himself. Like he knew who he was and what he wanted out of life. Our second conversation happened a week later. He came by the cafe again and lingered at a table this time, waiting until my shift ended so he could walk out with me. I was flattered by the attention, especially after months, no, years, of feeling invisible. Being a young mom in a professional program could sometimes feel isolating. Everyone else my age was out at bars on Friday nights, and I was at home changing diapers and memorizing clinical guidelines. So having this polished, attentive man show interest felt like stepping onto a stage in a new play, one where I might have an actual supporting role instead of just being an exhausted background character. That was how our story began, an exchange of phone numbers, friendly texts, then lunches that evolved into dinners. Each time we met, I found myself more drawn to him. He had an established career in something vaguely financial. He explained it in a quick summary involving investments and real estate. I didn't fully understand, but it sounded stable. Initially, nothing about him struck me as suspicious. Instead, I saw a man who could offer me not just romance, but a sense of security I hadn't realized I was craving. I wasn't naive, at least not consciously. I knew there was an age gap. Friends teased me, saying I had daddy issues, which I fiercely refuted. I genuinely believed in forging a connection with someone who respected my responsibilities and schedule. Michael seemed to do that. He never pressured me to stay out late when I had to wake early with Melanie, nor did he balk at the mention of me having a child. In fact, he seemed supportive, always asking if I needed anything. Looking back, I see the subtle red flags, the controlling questions that popped up early on. "Where were you last night?" He'd text, followed by, "Were you really studying?" At first, I found it sweet that he seemed so concerned about my well-being. Over time, though, those questions began to feel like he needed constant proof of my loyalty, but I brushed it off. "He's just protective," I'd tell myself. Or I'd attribute it to the generational difference. Maybe older men expected more structure in relationships. It was in those first few months that we set a pattern. We'd see each other after he got off work on weekdays, sometimes Fridays, often Sundays. But rarely, if ever, on Saturdays. He gave random excuses. "I've got a standing commitment," or "I'm doing some errands with my daughter," or "I promised a buddy I'd help him out." None of it seemed particularly strange. Men with busy lives have obligations, right? And I had obligations too: classes, labs, a child. I suppose at that stage I wasn't exactly eager to push for more. My own schedule was so intense that seeing him 3 or 4 nights a week felt like a lot. I was content not to question the absent Saturdays too closely, as I had so many other tasks that demanded my mental energy. Our dynamic worked. He was always around when I needed a break from the stress. He'd show up at my apartment with groceries or a small gift for Melanie, put her to bed while I finished reading for an exam, then watch a show with me before we'd share a glass of wine. It was easy, comforting, though financially he offered help in fits and starts. I did notice something peculiar. He never gave me money outright for bills or child expenses, but if I said I needed new textbooks, he'd order them or reimburse me. If the fridge was empty, he'd take me shopping. It wasn't a lavish lifestyle by any means, but it kept me afloat so I could focus on school without working extra shifts. I figured this was a sign of good intentions, a man who recognized the daily realities of a single mom pursuing a difficult path, stepping in where he could. My parents were estranged, so it felt nice to have support from someone. At this point, it never crossed my mind that he might be married. None of his gestures or commentary hinted that he lived with someone else. In fact, he told me he had a big dog in his house that made a mess. "He's always knocking things over," he'd joke. That's why I never visited. The few times I suggested stopping by, he'd say, "Oh, I'd be embarrassed. It's in no state for a lady." It was chivalrous in a way, or so I thought. I believed that once my schedule was lighter, I'd help him tidy up, or we'd find a better living situation together. Who knew? The future was wide open. These memories, in retrospect, form the backdrop to what would become a heartbreak so intense it made me question my own judgment. How could I, a self-aware, determined young woman, not see that the man in front of me was weaving a tapestry of lies from the very start? Chapter 2-3, Life as a Student Mom Before Michael. My life was a whirlwind. I balanced my toddler's needs with endless academic tasks. Waking up at 5 a.m. to review notes, dropping Melanie off at daycare, attending lectures, fitting in a quick lunch, then rushing to pick her up, cooking dinner, bathing her, reading bedtime stories. I was the definition of stretched thin. But I loved my daughter. Melanie was only 3, full of laughter and curiosity. Each day brought new words, new questions. I'd read about early childhood development in class, applying that knowledge in real time to my parenting. My dream was to finish my program, secure a stable job in healthcare, and give my daughter a stable life I never had growing up. I never expected to meet a man during this hectic phase. In fact, I'd sworn off serious relationships after Melanie's father vanished from our lives soon after her birth. He and I had been naive college kids ourselves, unprepared for the reality of parenthood. When things got tough, he bailed. It was painful, but I'd decided I was strong enough to be alone, so Michael's arrival felt like a gift from the universe. An older, stable presence, my friends from class, and even the few neighbours I had in my building were intrigued, though some were sceptical about the age gap. My neighbour, Linda, expressed concerns early on. She saw him waiting outside my door a few times, calling me multiple times a day. "Are you sure he's not just controlling?" she asked one afternoon, sipping tea in my kitchen. Men that age can be pretty set in their ways. I shrugged off Linda's caution. "He's just protective," I said, hearing the hollowness in my own voice. "He's older, more settled. Maybe that's why he's so particular." Linda nodded politely, but didn't look convinced. To be fair, in those first few months, Michael hadn't displayed any explosive temper or overt manipulation. No arguments that made me fearful. If anything, he just wanted to know everything about my day, who I talked to, which classes I attended, how many male classmates I was around. "You never know with men your age," he once said with a scowl, as if everyone under 30 was a predator waiting to pounce. It was oddly flattering to be protected from illusions of a threat, and at that time I interpreted his curiosity as a sign of devotion. I told myself, he cares. On the weekdays we'd see each other, Michael would text incessantly if I was running even 5 minutes late. Or, "Where are you?" Or, "Is everything okay?" he'd ask, building up to repeated calls. It was a habit that grated on me at times, but also reassured me that he was invested, not the type to ignore me. Once, I was busy in a study group and forgot to respond. He reacted with borderline panic, showing up unannounced outside the campus library. In a bizarre way, I found that romantic. Someone caring enough to check if I was safe. Though the relationship had these controlling undercurrents, it also provided real benefits. I recall a time I needed $400 for a specialized exam registration fee. I was panicking because I didn't have the funds, and the deadline was 3 days away. Michael wrote me a check on the spot. He didn't even hesitate. That single gesture eased a boulder of stress from my shoulders. I repaid him by cooking a meal, but he waved it off, insisting, "Your success is our success." Is our success. The phrase stuck with me. For the first time in years, I believed I might be building a shared future with someone who understood my challenges and had the resources and willingness to step in. We're a team, I thought. He's got me, and I've got him. And so, despite the occasional oddities, like the fact I'd never seen his home, I let my guard down further. He was gradually meeting my daughter, too. He never spent the night at first, though. Melanie knew him as Mommy's friend, sometimes Mommy's special friend. He'd bring little gifts for her. A stuffed animal, a colouring book. She took to him in that innocent way toddlers do, excited by new things. I remember how he'd read bedtime stories to her if I had a big test in the morning. He had a soft voice when talking to children, a gentle tone that made Melanie laugh. Watching them, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe this could be the father figure she lacked. I just need to keep an eye out for any red flags. But as the months wore on, my capacity to notice red flags became dulled by gratitude for his financial help and the little caretaker role he was playing. I was busy, tired, overwhelmed, in a precarious position, that's the truth. When a controlling man offers a respite from your daily burdens, it's alarmingly easy to rationalize away the subtle warnings. Step by step, I was yielding more and more of my emotional autonomy, focusing on school and motherhood, rather than the strange puzzle pieces that didn't fit in Michael's stories. Little did I suspect that I was living in a carefully constructed bubble, one that would pop violently one unsuspecting weekday. Chapter 3. The missing Saturdays. Looking back, a glaring red flag was Michael's insistence on avoiding Saturdays. Sure, he'd see me after work on Mondays through Fridays, often drop by for a while on Fridays too. Sundays we'd go to the park or have a small brunch. But Saturdays had always been off limits, locked behind vague excuses. It took me months to realize the pattern. The day I became acutely aware of it was a Friday. I was feeling playful, wanting to plan a special surprise date for Saturday. I texted Michael around noon. "Hey, how about tomorrow we go out somewhere fun? Maybe a little road trip." For once, I had a free weekend day with no assignments due immediately, and Melanie was going to be with her babysitter for half the day. My phone buzzed half an hour later with his reply. "I'd love to, but I have plans. I'll see if I can rearrange." He never elaborated on those plans. By 6 p.m., he still hadn't mentioned Saturday again. That evening, he came over for an hour, paying extra attention to me, complimenting my hair, my outfit, kissing my forehead. It felt like he was softening me up, distracting from the tension brewing inside me over the continuing Saturday puzzle. Finally, I pressed him as he stood by the door, about to leave. "What exactly is it you do on Saturdays?" I asked, half laughing, trying to appear casual. "Are you working a second job or something?" He gave a tight smile. "Family stuff," he said, shrugging. "My daughter and I run around sometimes, or I catch up on personal projects." Then he leaned in, kissing my cheek. "But you're not missing much, I promise." I murmured, letting him go. Yet the question stuck like a splinter. Up to that point, the idea that he might be married never crossed my mind. After all, he was so present in my life the other 6 days of the week. Did a married man spend that much time with another woman? Didn't they typically vanish quickly, avoid spending nights out, or have suspicious phone usage? Then again, I realized I never truly saw him handle phone calls in front of me. He texted me a lot, but who else might he have been texting? The next few weeks, a subtle shift happened. Suddenly, Michael started coming around on Saturdays. Not every Saturday, but occasionally, and it felt like a victory, a sign of progress. Maybe he realized I was suspicious or unhappy with his absences. Perhaps he decided to invest more fully in the relationship now that we'd been together for about 6 months. I didn't question his new availability. Instead, I welcomed it. We had a few nice weekends, movies at my apartment, cheap pizza dinners with Melanie. Quiet, domestic moments that lulled me into a sense of genuine partnership. In fact, the day before the discovery, I was almost giddy. Michael had slept over at my place that Friday night, something he'd only recently started doing. The next morning, we all made pancakes together. Me, Melanie, and Michael in the kitchen, flipping batter and laughing at the toddler's messy attempts to stir. It was a sweet, ordinary family tableau. I remember thinking, so this is what normalcy feels like. 2 adults, a child, a tiny apartment, but lots of love. It never occurred to me that a single piece of plastic hidden in his wallet might blow that illusion to smithereens. Chapter 4. The wallet, the day it all unravelled, started off so unremarkably. That Saturday, Michael woke up first, rummaging in the kitchen to make coffee. I yawned my way into the living room, checking on Melanie, who was happily playing with her stuffed animals. We had a lazy morning planned. No particular agenda until the afternoon, when we might venture out to run errands. Michael soon announced that he had to make a quick run to the hardware store. I forget exactly why. Something about needing a special tool for a project. He was dressed casually, in jeans and a sweatshirt, rummaging through his coat pockets. He then realized he'd left his wallet on the coffee table. For a fleeting second, our eyes met as he grabbed it. "I'll be back in an hour," he said, kissing the top of my head. "I'll bring lunch." He walked out the door. But only a few minutes later, I heard a frustrated knock. Turned out he'd left his phone in the living room. He slipped in, grabbed it, gave me a quick wave, then slipped out again. It was at that moment I noticed something. His wallet was lying next to the couch, half hidden under a cushion, as if it had fallen from his pocket. Strange, I thought. Didn't he just pick it up? I told myself I'd just give it back when he returned. But an uneasy feeling blossomed in my chest. He'd walked out so quickly. Maybe he didn't realize he was missing it. Then I recalled the occasional controlling nature of his questions, the weird secrecy about his life, the newly rearranged Saturdays. I don't know if it was suspicion or curiosity or a combination of both, but I suddenly felt an impulse to look inside the wallet. Maybe I thought I'd find a clue to explain his behavior or confirm some quiet suspicion I'd never fully acknowledged, or maybe I was simply letting my nerves get the best of me. Either way, I picked it up. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Driver's license, a couple of credit cards, some cash, a store rewards card. Then I spotted something that sent a jolt through my system, an insurance card. I'd rummaged enough in my own insurance documents over the years to know these often list dependents or spouses. This one had two names on it, his name, and another woman's name listed right under his, sharing his last name. My first thought was his daughter must be on his insurance, but wait, he'd told me his daughter's name several times, and it was definitely not this name. This was an adult woman. My mind started spinning. Could it be a sister, a mother, a cousin? But the way it was laid out on the card strongly suggested spouse coverage. I felt a wave of nausea. I wrestled with myself. Was I jumping to conclusions? Maybe there was a logical explanation. But that's when I remembered the missing Saturdays, the tidy excuses about his home being messy. Could he be married? My heart pounded in my ears. I carefully placed the wallet back where I'd found it, then rushed to my phone. With trembling hands, I typed the name I'd seen on the card into Facebook. I half expected to find no results or some random person in another state. Instead, there she was, an elegant-looking woman in her late 30s or early 40s, with the same last name as Michael. My chest squeezed painfully when I clicked on her profile. Pinned right at the top was a photo of her and Michael, arms around each other, smiling, with the caption, "Our anniversary trip. Blessed to have this man by my side." I was stunned. My mind whirled. Anniversary trip. My gaze locked on the date. It was posted just last year, only a few months before I'd met him. If that wasn't damning enough, another picture from a few weeks ago showed them at a family gathering, presumably. Michael's arm was around her shoulders. There was no question, they looked like a married couple. My stomach felt hollow, anger and heartbreak swirling in a storm of disbelief. Everything else in the pictures reinforced it, matching wedding bands in some shots, affectionate poses. This was no ex. This was an active marriage. I felt physically sick, fighting back tears, darting my gaze toward Melanie's bedroom. She was still playing, oblivious. My entire body shook with adrenaline. How could he do this? The wave of realization nearly sent me collapsing onto the couch. 7 months. He'd been living a double life for 7 whole months, at least. Possibly longer. Even while he'd been reading bedtime stories to my daughter, he was presumably going home to another woman. I spent the next 20 minutes in a daze. Part of me wanted to grab my daughter and run out the door, flee. Another part of me wanted to stay calm, gather evidence, confront him rationally. My head was full of conflicting instincts, the fight or flight response of an animal cornered by a predator. In the end, I decided to wait until he returned, but he didn't show up as promised after an hour. As minutes turned into hours and the clock approached midday, I realized he must have discovered the missing wallet. Maybe he'd become suspicious or changed his mind about returning so soon. My phone buzzed, a text from him, saying something came up and he'd be delayed. A wave of rage passed over me. He's lying even now. I felt sure he'd realized the wallet was missing, maybe guessed I'd seen its contents, but I had no real proof of that. Eventually, he did return, though. He walked in with a plastic bag from a fast food chain and tried to act casual, patting his pockets. "Hey, babe, you see my wallet? I must have dropped it." I felt my chest tighten, but I handed it to him, forcing neutrality into my expression. "Found it on the floor," I said, voice taut. "Must have fallen out of your pocket." He exhaled, feigning relief, and sat down on the couch. As Melanie was still within earshot, I bit back the urge to scream. I bided my time, waiting until she was engrossed in a TV show to mention anything. Then I calmly said I needed to run a quick errand. He watched me suspiciously as I grabbed my keys and left, but I didn't care. I needed fresh air, some space to figure out how to confront him. Chapter 53. A tense confrontation. The confrontation, when it came, was not a cinematic shouting match. It was quieter, more insidious. After my short drive around the block, I returned home with a plan to tackle this directly. My heart hammered as I walked in. Michael was on the couch, flipping through channels. Melanie was playing with her tablet in the corner. "Can we talk in the other room?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, brows furrowed, but followed me into the bedroom. My mind reeled with possible scripts, but the moment the door shut, the words tumbled out in a near whisper. "Who's the woman on your insurance card?" His expression froze. For a second, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Then he mustered a shaky laugh. "My ex?" He lied, adjusting the collar of his shirt. "I just never updated my policy. It's complicated, you know how insurance is." I folded my arms, heart pounding. "You never told me you were previously married," I said, voice shaking. "Doesn't it list spouses only?" He blinked, stammering. "We're separated, but I still cover her. She has health issues. It's not what you think." The lack of conviction in his tone made my blood boil. I pressed on. "I looked her up. On Facebook. Pictures of you two together last month. Anniversary trip. A family event. So explain that." He inhaled sharply, eyes darting toward the door. I wondered if he was calculating how loud we were talking, whether Melanie could hear. Then he let out a forced sigh. "Fine, it's not exactly done. We've been on the rocks for a while. We live separate lives. But we haven't filed for divorce yet." All anger surged in me. "So you lied to me for 7 months. Let me think you were single while you were actually living with your wife." I tried to keep my voice low, but the tremor of rage was unmistakable. He reached for my arm, but I recoiled. "Don't," I hissed, tears stinging my eyes. "I have a right to be furious." He exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm sorry," he said, "but it's complicated. We're essentially roommates at this point. Bother nerve?" My vision blurred with hot tears. It felt like the floor was crumbling beneath my feet. Why didn't you just tell me from the start?" I demanded. "Or, better yet, why date me at all if you're not divorced? I don't want to be some affair." He shook his head, stepping closer. I could smell his cologne. I remembered how safe that scent once made me feel, and now it only fueled my rage. "Please, just give me a day," he begged. "I can show you proof that we're not really together, that it's all legal and basically a formality. Trust me." A part of me wanted to laugh in his face. If they were truly separated, if the marriage was merely on paper, why the secrecy? Why hide me from his messy house? Why the elaborate excuses about Saturdays? The truth was obvious. He was a married man leading a double life. I glared at him, arms folded, tears running down my cheeks. "If you're not married, you don't need a day to prove it," I said. "Produce a divorce decree. Show me the papers right now. Or call her. Let me hear her confirm she's just a roommate." He spluttered. "That's not how it works. I can't blindside her with that. She's been through enough." Now I felt physically ill. Been through enough. My mind raced, imagining a wife at home, possibly suspecting, or maybe clued her husband was off playing house with a younger woman who had no idea she existed. The injustice of it all made me want to scream. I turned away from him, tears still spilling. "Just go," I managed to say, keeping my voice low for Melanie's sake. "I need time to think." He tried to reach out again. "Please, believe me. Let me fix this." But I refused to look at him. The hush that followed was piercing, broken only by the muffled sound of cartoons from the living room. Eventually I heard him sigh, then the door clicked open. Footsteps retreated, and the front door shut. I was alone, trembling in shock and betrayal. Chapter 6. A message to his wife. After he left, I sat on my bed, phone in hand, mind churning with half-formed plans. Part of me considered calling the woman, his wife, presumably. If Michael was telling the truth, maybe she'd confirm they were on the verge of divorce. If he was lying, maybe she deserved to know. But a paralyzing fear weighed on my chest. What if I'm about to blow up a marriage? But wasn't that marriage effectively a lie if her husband was carrying on with me? In the swirl of heartbreak, I remembered the pictures on Facebook, her smiling face next to his. She posted them publicly. It didn't look like a forced arrangement or a loveless union, so what was I supposed to do? I ended up drafting a short message. Just a single question to her on Facebook. Hi, I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you're married to Michael too. Oh. Nothing else, no accusations. I hesitated before clicking send, my heart in my throat. What if I'm intruding where I don't belong? What if she blocks me? Or humiliates me? Yet I wanted answers. I needed to confirm the truth from someone who wasn't Michael. Maybe she'd confirm they were separated. Maybe this fiasco had an explanation. So I sent the message. I didn't expect a response right away. She might not see the message for hours, or she might ignore a stranger's query. But only about 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Michael. My heart sank. Why are you messaging her? You promised to let me prove myself first. How could you do that? I told you to wait. Rage flared inside me. I typed back. You're married and you never told me. You lied for 7 months. I owe you nothing. But I stopped short of sending it. Did I really want to engage in a text war? He was furious, though, and that told me everything I needed to know. Clearly, he was afraid of me and his wife having direct contact. If they were truly separated, why would it matter? Let her confirm they were just roommates, right? But he was panicking. That panic was the final clue I needed to confirm he was a liar, that his story about an amicable separation was likely another smokescreen. I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked his number to give myself space. My hands shook as I stared at my screen, feeling both numb and heartbreakingly alive with adrenaline. Melanie was in the next room, calling for me, probably wanting a snack or help with her game. I took a moment to collect myself, wiping away tears. I forced a smile as I walked out, kneeling beside my daughter. She looked up at me with her big eyes, oblivious to the emotional wreckage roiling inside me. I hugged her tight, inhaling her familiar scent, reminding myself I had to be strong for her. The woman, his wife, never replied. The message just hung there, read but unanswered. That felt like confirmation in itself. Maybe she'd confronted him instead, or maybe she was in denial. I'll never know, but the fact that Michael immediately raged at me for contacting her was all the evidence I needed that he was in the wrong. That evening, I told Michael, through one last text, never to contact me again. I typed it out carefully. I can't be part of this. Please don't call or text. I'll be changing my locks if needed. This is over. And I hit send before my resolve could waver. I blocked him right after. It was done, but heartbreak doesn't disappear with a single text. The next days were a blur of numb sorrow. I had to pick up the financial pieces too. The little cushion he had provided was gone, and I realized I had no backup plan. I felt manipulated and also foolish for relying on him. Late at night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every affectionate moment. Had it all been a lie? Did he care for me at all, or was I just a fling to him? My self-esteem plummeted. Friends told me I wasn't at fault. He'd deceived me, yet I couldn't shake the shame of ignoring the signs. I was the one who let a married man into my home, near my child, albeit unknowingly. That thought made my stomach turn. For the next few weeks, I lived in constant tension, worried he might show up, try to gaslight me into believing some half-baked story. Each knock on my door made my heart race. Each ring of my phone made me jump, but Michael didn't come around. Maybe because he knew I'd threatened to confront his wife directly if he pushed me, or maybe he'd found a new way to hide his lies. Either way, he vanished from my life, leaving behind a sense of betrayal so acute I felt physically ill just thinking about him. In the aftermath, I struggled to remain focused on classes, to show up for Melanie with the same energy. The sense of heartbreak was tinged with disgust. Disgust at him for lying, disgust at myself for being so gullible. I realized that controlling men often manipulate situations so skillfully that even the best of us can be blindsided. Yes, the red flags were there, but it's so much easier to see them in hindsight. In the moment, we cling to the good, the supportive gestures, the illusions of love. Especially if we're desperate for help, for a partner in the chaos of single motherhood. It took me a long time to recover from that heartbreak. But recover I did, or at least, I started the slow journey toward healing. The hardest part was learning to trust myself again. How could I not see what was in front of me? That question haunted me. With time, however, I recognized that sometimes, when life is already complicated and exhausting, we push away suspicion to preserve our hope and sanity. It wasn't stupidity, it was survival. And so, life moved on, one day at a time. Chapter 7: Turmoil and Reflection. Once the immediate storm of discovery subsided, I found myself grappling with an internal tidal wave of self-doubt. In the quiet moments, after Melanie fell asleep, or between classes at school, I'd replay the entire relationship, trying to pinpoint exactly where I'd gone wrong. Why hadn't I insisted on seeing his house earlier? Why hadn't I pressed him more about the missing Saturdays? I couldn't help but feel that, somehow, I wanted to believe him so desperately. With my heavy academic load and single parenthood, I'd craved a partner who would shoulder some of the burdens. Perhaps I'd turned a blind eye to blatant inconsistencies. The realization stung. Therapy became a lifeline for me in those weeks. I wasn't sure if I could afford it, but I found a low-cost counseling option through my university. My counselor, a warm older woman named Diana, listened sympathetically as I recounted the entire saga. How I'd met Michael, how he'd wooed me, the financial support, and finally the heartbreaking discovery of his marriage. Diana told me something that stuck. The betrayal says more about him than it does about you. You were in a vulnerable place, but he was the one who chose deception as a strategy. It was a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. She helped me see that controlling behaviors like his, insistent questioning, boundary-crossing demands for constant updates, were more than just quirks. They were hallmarks of an unhealthy dynamic. Michael had likely thrived on the secrecy, finding validation in having two different women reliant on him. I also faced the harsh financial reality of losing his help. Suddenly, I had to figure out how to pay for textbooks, daycare, rent, and everyday bills, all on my meager loans and scholarships. For a brief time, I picked up extra shifts at the campus cafe again, although it stretched my schedule to the breaking point. My grades wobbled, and I was often exhausted. But I refused to let his betrayal derail my entire future. If anything, my anger fueled me to push forward, to succeed despite him. Melanie sensed my stress. Toddlers are eerily perceptive. She'd crawl into my lap sometimes, pat my cheek, and ask, "Mommy sad?" I'd muster a smile, hugging her. "Just a little, sweetie, but I love you." I never mentioned Michael to her again. She occasionally asked about him. "Where is your friend?" But I changed the subject, not wanting to confuse her. Eventually, she stopped asking. I had my share of tearful nights, too, especially remembering those moments. I'd admired him reading to my daughter. The sense of betrayal was magnified by the fact I'd let him so close to the person who mattered most to me. I berated myself for being gullible, but each therapy session, each supportive conversation with a friend, reminded me that being trusting isn't inherently wrong. The wrongdoing was his choice to lie. Now and then, I couldn't resist peeking at his wife's Facebook profile. Maybe to see if she'd posted something about him, or if she'd changed her relationship status, but her posts were private and nothing new indicated a breakup or drama. A small part of me, had hoped she'd respond to my message, that we could share information and confirm the timeline of betrayal. But she never did. In time, I realized she might be coping in her own way, perhaps confronting him behind closed doors, or maybe she was too embarrassed to respond to a strange woman who claimed to be her husband's girlfriend. I thought about that potential scenario often. If she discovered his betrayal, what might she do? Or maybe he spun a story about a crazy, obsessive coworker who was harassing him. A man who can lie for 7 months can easily lie again. The uncertainty weighed on me, but it wasn't my place to intervene unless she reached out. I'd done all I could. Despite everything, a flicker of longing remained when you share intimate moments with someone for half a year. Someone who has been a big part of your daily routine. It's not easy to switch off your emotions. I hated him, but I also missed the sense of stability I once associated with him. A twisted paradox, but heartbreak seldom follows neat logic. As the weeks passed, I dove deeper into my studies, determined not to let his lies define my future. I retreated from social life, too afraid to let anyone else get close. For better or worse, I decided I'd be single until my program ended. Maybe then I'd have the emotional bandwidth to truly assess a person's character before letting them into Melanie's world. Chapter 8. Steps toward closure. About 2 months after the break, something unexpected happened. I was in the campus library, scanning the stacks for a research paper source, when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. On my screen was a short email from Michael. I'd blocked his number, but apparently my email was still accessible. My heart pounded as I opened it. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." The body of the email was a rambling explanation. He claimed that, yes, he was married, but they'd been distant. He insisted that he hadn't told me because he was afraid I'd walk away from him, and he'd grown to care for me deeply. Then he wrote, "I realize how badly I hurt you, and if you want me to stay away, I'll respect that. But please understand I never meant to cause you pain." I stared at the words, anger and sadness colliding. He offered no tangible evidence that they were separated, no mention of a pending divorce. Just vague sentiments about feeling lonely in his marriage. The nerve. He acted as if that justified lying to me. A small part of me felt validated that he admitted it, but it changed nothing. I typed a short response. "Never contact me again. You lied. You're still lying. Good luck." Then I hit send. I blocked his email as well. That final email exchange was my last contact with him. I felt a jolt of relief once it was done. Like hammering a final nail in the coffin of that disastrous relationship. Any illusions I had left were extinguished by his refusal to own his deception fully. If he truly had regrets, he'd have told me the entire truth from the start, or come clean without leaving me to discover it on my own. After that, I poured my energy into finishing the semester. My grades bounced back. I found a more flexible part-time job at a nearby clinic that accommodated my class schedule and offered better pay than the campus cafe. Step by step, I rebuilt my financial footing. Some days, I still felt the old ache of betrayal, the humiliation that I'd let a married man into my life. But those painful thoughts gradually gave way to a sharper sense of self-preservation and clarity. I confided in a close friend from my program. She was outraged on my behalf, exclaiming how cunning he must have been, how no one could have guessed he was leading that life. She reminded me that, while he was older, I was more mature in some ways, because I was owning my mistakes and learning from them. Her words helped. For the first time in ages, I felt a trickle of pride. Yes, I'd been deceived, but I wasn't letting that define me. I was forging a new path, relying on my resilience. By the end of that year, I realized I'd come out of the experience stronger. My trust in men might have been at an all-time low, but my trust in myself was inching upward. I began to see that my supposed mistake was simply believing a man who'd given me plenty of reasons to trust him. That's not a sin. It's an unfortunate risk we take whenever we open our hearts. I had risked it. I'd lost, but I wasn't going to remain paralyzed by the grief. Chapter 90 Lessons Learned. When I look back on those 7 months with Michael, it's easy to label them as wasted time. But in therapy and through personal reflection, I gained insights into my own vulnerabilities and the manipulative tactics he used. 1. Age gap and power dynamics. While some age gap relationships can be healthy, I realized how much leverage Michael had simply by being older, more financially secure, and more experienced in the art of deception. He exploited the fact that I was juggling single motherhood and a rigorous academic schedule. He knew I didn't have the bandwidth to investigate his background thoroughly or stand up to him when he questioned me incessantly. 2. Controlling behavior as a red flag. I previously chalked up his need to know my every move as a sign of devotion. In hindsight, it was a telltale sign of controlling behavior that can escalate. If I had recognized it for what it was, emotional manipulation, I might have left sooner, or at least asked tougher questions about his own life. 3. Financial dependencies. By helping me with groceries, textbooks, and incidental bills, Michael built a sense of obligation I felt toward him. It became harder for me to challenge him or set firm boundaries. Moving forward, I became determined to never rely so fully on someone else financially unless we had a transparent, committed relationship. 4. Boundaries around my child. One of my biggest regrets is letting him get close to Melanie before truly verifying his background. My initial trust and excitement overshadowed my protective instincts. I learned that any partner stepping into a parental figure role must be vetted thoroughly. 5. Gut instinct. Looking back, there were moments of quiet unease I chose to ignore. Like him refusing me entry to his home, the missing Saturdays, the vague answers about his past. Often, our intuition senses danger before our mind acknowledges it. I vowed to listen more closely to that inner voice in the future. I still felt pangs of shame, but transforming those pangs into constructive lessons allowed me to reclaim a sense of agency. I wasn't a helpless victim. I was a woman who survived a con and was determined not to fall for one again. Interestingly, as time went on, some old acquaintances who knew me and Michael casually reached out with tidbits of gossip. A friend of a friend claimed that Michael had boasted about hooking up with younger women before, though they weren't sure if he was actually married. Another mutual acquaintance insisted they'd heard Michael was getting separated for years, yet never actually saw any divorce paperwork. None of this gossip changed anything for me, but it reinforced that he was a serial manipulator. I was simply one more in a line of people he'd lied to. Strangely, that made me feel less foolish. If he was practiced at this, it wasn't my failing alone. It was his pattern, and if he was so adept at juggling multiple stories, it's no wonder I got caught in his web. Chapter 10. Moving forward, 2 years have passed since the day I found that insurance card in Michael's wallet. I'm in a better place now, working steadily in my chosen field, living in a slightly larger apartment with Melanie, who's now in kindergarten. Life is still hectic, but in a different, more fulfilling way. I no longer fear the phone ringing, worried it might be him with some new manipulative twist. I haven't heard from him since that final email, nor have I ever heard from his wife. Sometimes I wonder if she uncovered the truth or if she still lives in a bubble of denial. Maybe she left him, or maybe they patched things up. I'll never know, and I've made peace with that uncertainty. I can't fix his life, nor do I want any involvement in it. This experience taught me to trust my instincts and set firmer boundaries. When I date now, I make it clear. If someone is not transparent, if they have a complex domestic situation, I won't invest my emotional energy. I also realize that I have the strength to stand on my own 2 feet. Financially, emotionally, academically, without needing a man to rescue me from life's challenges. In a sense, Michael was the impetus for me to sharpen my sense of self-worth. He gave me an education that, though painful, might protect me from greater harm down the road. For that, I can muster a shard of gratitude among the bitterness. I'd rather have learned these lessons at 24 than at 34, after a decade of illusions. Melanie, blissfully, doesn't remember Michael. If she does, it's a faint recollection of a man who once read her stories. I'm grateful for that, because it means she was spared the emotional fallout. She's busy forging her own memories now. School friends, weekend outings with Mom. My love for her is what propelled me through the darkest days of heartbreak, reminding me that I had no choice but to keep going. Occasionally, people ask if I'm open to a relationship. I don't say no, but I do say I'm cautious. Some interpret the caution as cynicism, but I don't see it that way. I see it as survival. I see it as having learned the difference between genuine trust and forced illusions. If love finds me, it'll have to come through honesty, respect and mutual care, a far cry from the lies and manipulations that once tied me in knots. Looking back on the entire ordeal with Michael, I understand how easily infatuation can blind us, especially in times of stress and vulnerability. But I also know that I emerged stronger, with a clearer sense of what I need and deserve. And for all the tears, for all the fury I initially felt, I can honestly say I've grown into a person who won't settle for anything less than real. So, the next time someone wonders how a smart, self-aware girl could end up with a married man, unwittingly, I'll tell them the truth. It can happen to anyone. Sometimes the best liars wear the most earnest faces. The key is to remember that their lie is on them. The rest of us might just need a little time to heal, learn, and move forward, wiser and more resilient than before. Because at the end of the day, no matter how deeply we've been hurt, we still have the power to reclaim our lives. And that, more than any heartbreak, is what truly defines us.